Grace's world shattered the night she was thrown onto the cold streets, pregnant and penniless. She had been an orphan her entire life, working as a maid in the grand Whitmore mansion, dreaming of nothing more than a safe place to sleep and enough food to survive. But when the billionaire Marcus Whitmore got her pregnant, everything changed. He didn't see her as a human being, just a mistake that needed to disappear. This is the story of a woman's unbreakable spirit, a son's extraordinary rise, and a father's devastating fall from grace. Before we continue, comment down below the country you're watching from. This is a story of karma, justice, and the price of cruelty. Let's begin.
Grace had always known her place in the world, at the bottom, looking up. At 22 years old, she had spent her entire life as an orphan, passed from one foster home to another until she aged out of the system. With no family, no education beyond high school, and no safety net, she had taken the only job she could find, a live-in maid at the Whitmore estate. The mansion was a world unto itself, marble floors that stretched like frozen lakes, crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, and walls lined with art she didn't understand but knew was priceless. Marcus Whitmore, the master of this gilded palace, was a man who had never heard the word no. At 45, he had built a tech empire worth billions. He was handsome in that cold, polished way that wealth produces, sharp suits, sharper eyes, and a smile that never reached past his perfectly white teeth. Grace had been working there for 8 months when it happened. It started with late-night requests. Bring me coffee to my study. Then compliments that made her uncomfortable. You're different from the other staff, Grace. You have potential. She had been naive, hopeful even. She thought he saw her more than just a servant. She was wrong. One night, after the rest of the household staff had gone to their quarters, Marcus called her to his private lounge. There was expensive wine, soft music, and words that sounded like promises. That night changed everything. 3 weeks later, Grace knew something was terribly wrong. The nausea hit her every morning like a wave, brutal and relentless. She would grip the edge of the bathroom sink in her tiny servant's room, her knuckles white, her body trembling. At first, she told herself it was the flu, exhaustion, anything but the truth she was too terrified to face. But when her period didn't come and then didn't come again, the truth became impossible to ignore. She bought a pregnancy test from a pharmacy 3 blocks away, wearing a hood and sunglasses like a criminal. Her hands shook so badly she could barely open the box. When those 2 pink lines appeared, her entire world collapsed into a single, suffocating moment of panic. She was pregnant, and Marcus Whitmore was the father. For 2 days, she carried the secret like a stone in her chest, unable to eat, unable to sleep. She rehearsed 1,000 different ways to tell him, imagining scenarios where he would be shocked but supportive, where he would take responsibility, where he would see this as a chance to build something real. She was a fool. On a cold Thursday evening, after the family had finished their dinner and the other staff had retired, Grace gathered every ounce of courage she possessed. She found Marcus in his study, surrounded by leather-bound books he never read and art he never looked at. "Mr. Whitmore," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to speak with you. It's important." He didn't even look up from his laptop. "I'm pregnant," she said, the words falling like stones into the silent room. "The baby, it's yours." The silence that followed was the most terrifying sound she had ever heard. Marcus Whitmore's face transformed in an instant. The mask of the charming billionaire vanished, replaced by something cold and cruel. He slowly closed his laptop, his eyes narrowing as he finally looked at her, not with concern or shock, but with pure, calculated contempt. "Excuse me?" His voice was ice. "I'm pregnant," Grace repeated, her voice trembling now. I I didn't plan this. I don't want anything from you. I just thought you should know." "You thought wrong." He stood up, towering over her. "Let me be very clear, Grace. Whatever you think happened between us was a mistake. A momentary lapse in judgment on my part." The words hit her like physical blows. "But the baby!" He cut her off sharply. "There is no baby. Not one that has anything to do with me. Do you understand? If you try to claim otherwise, I will destroy you. I have lawyers who eat people like you for breakfast." Grace felt tears burning her eyes. "I'm not trying to trap you. I needed you to know." Marcus walked to his desk and pulled out a checkbook. He scribbled something quickly and tore out the check, holding it out to her like she was something dirty. "Here, $20,000, more than generous for someone in your position. Take it, deal with your situation however you want, and disappear from my life. You're fired, effective immediately." He turned his back on her, dismissing her like garbage. Grace stood frozen, the check trembling in her hand, her entire world crumbling around her. Grace stood on the sidewalk outside the Whitmore Mansion gates at midnight, a single worn suitcase beside her, and $20,000 that felt like blood money in her pocket. The night was cold. The city lights stretched endlessly before her, beautiful and indifferent. She had nowhere to go. For the first week, she survived on cheap motels, the kind where the sheets smelled like cigarettes and the walls were thin enough to hear every argument, every cry, every broken life playing out in neighboring rooms. She watched the money drain away. $60 a night, plus food, plus the vitamins the free clinic told her she needed for the baby. The math was brutal. At this rate, she'd be broke in 10 months. She needed a plan. She needed work. But finding a job while visibly pregnant and homeless was nearly impossible. Restaurants didn't want a server who might go into labor mid-shift. Retail stores took one look at her condition and suddenly had no openings. Even the call centers, those last refuges of the desperate, turned her away. By her second month on the streets, Grace had moved into a women's shelter in the poorest part of the city. It was a concrete building with barred windows, where women with haunted eyes shared stories she wished she'd never heard. But it was safe. And it was free. She took whatever work she could find, cleaning offices at night, washing dishes at a 24-hour diner, folding laundry at a hotel that paid under the table and didn't ask questions. Her hands became raw and red. Her back ached constantly. Her feet swelled until she could barely fit into her only pair of shoes. But every night she would place her hand on her growing belly and whisper the same promise. "I will give you a better life than I had. I swear it." The baby kicked in response, a tiny flutter of hope in an ocean of despair.
Grace went into labor on a rainy Tuesday evening, 3 weeks earlier than expected. She was alone in her cramped shelter room when the contractions began. Sharp, breathtaking waves of pain that doubled her over. The other women rushed her to the public hospital, where she was processed through the emergency room like just another number in an endless stream of emergencies. There was no private room, no gentle music, no proud father holding her hand. Just fluorescent lights, exhausted nurses, and the screaming reality of bringing a child into a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty. But then, after 14 hours of agony, she heard it, a cry. "It's a boy," the nurse said, placing the tiny, wrinkled baby on her chest. "Congratulations, Mama." Grace looked down at her son, this impossibly small human she had created, and something inside her shifted. All the pain, all the fear, all the humiliation, it suddenly had meaning. She had created life. She had created hope. "Daniel," she whispered, her tears falling onto his tiny face. "Your name is Daniel." She had no crib, no nursery, no baby shower gifts. She left the hospital 2 days later with her son wrapped in donated blankets, taking the bus back to the shelter with a diaper bag filled with free samples and a future that terrified her. But Grace was a survivor. She worked 3 jobs, carrying Daniel in a worn baby sling while she cleaned offices at night. She sang to him while she washed dishes, taught him colors while folding endless piles of laundry. She read to him from library books, free and precious, filling his mind with words even when her own stomach was empty. Money was always scarce, food was often limited, but love she gave in abundance. And Daniel, even as an infant, seemed to absorb everything around him with unusual intensity. His eyes followed patterns, his tiny hands reached for books instead of toys. The world had underestimated Grace. It would soon underestimate her son even more.
Daniel was different from the very beginning. By age 2, he was speaking in complete sentences. By 3, he was reading chapter books that children twice his age struggled with. By 5, he was solving math problems that left his kindergarten teacher stunned and calling Grace in for conferences. Ms. Grace, the teacher said, awkward and uncertain. Your son is exceptional. Have you considered testing him for gifted programs? Grace, wearing her cleanest work uniform and carrying the smell of industrial detergent, could only nod. Testing cost money. Programs cost money. Everything cost money she didn't have. But Daniel's brilliance couldn't be contained by poverty. He devoured every book the library offered, taught himself basic coding on the shelter's shared computer, and won every academic competition his underfunded school entered. Teachers whispered about him in break rooms. Principals made calls to special programs. When Daniel turned 7, a private academy across the city offered him a full scholarship. Tuition, books, uniforms, everything. It was a school where the children of doctors and lawyers studied, where the parking lot was filled with luxury cars and the cafeteria served organic meals. Grace cried when she read the acceptance letter. Her son, born in a public hospital to a homeless mother, was going to walk through doors she could never have dreamed of opening. But Daniel never forgot where he came from. While other students complained about their latest smartphones, he studied harder. While they took vacations to Europe, he worked part-time jobs to help his mother. He saw how she sacrificed everything, her health, her youth, her dreams, so he could have a chance. "Mom," he said one night when he was 12, looking up from a calculus textbook most adults couldn't understand, "I'm going to be successful, and when I am, you'll never have to work like this again. I promise." Grace smiled through her exhaustion, touching his face with her work-worn hands. "You're already successful, baby. You're kind, you're brilliant, you're everything he could never be." She never spoke Marcus Whitmore's name, but Daniel understood exactly who she meant.
While Daniel was rising, Marcus Whitmore was falling. It started small. Bad investments that his arrogance told him would recover. A tech startup that promised revolutionary AI but delivered vaporware. A real estate deal in a foreign market that collapsed when the government changed overnight. Marcus, who had always believed himself untouchable, doubled down on every loss, certain his golden touch would return. It never did. His company, once valued at $3 billion, began hemorrhaging money. Investors pulled out, partners disappeared. The board of directors, those sharks who had smiled and applauded him for years, turned on him with savage efficiency. Within 18 months, Marcus Whitmore went from billionaire to broke. The mansion was seized by banks. The cars were repossessed. His wife, a cold socialite who had married him for status and money, filed for divorce and took what little remained. His so-called friends, those powerful men who had laughed at his jokes and drank his expensive whiskey, stopped returning his calls. He moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood he would have never driven through before. The furniture was second-hand. The walls were thin. He could hear his neighbors arguing, cooking, living their ordinary lives. Marcus tried to rebuild, but the financial world has a long memory. No one would invest in him. No one would hire him. The name that once opened every door now closed them all. He took a job as a sales manager at a mid-level tech firm, reporting to people half his age who had once begged for his attention. Pride, it turned out, was expensive, and karma had perfect timing. One evening, scrolling through business news on his laptop in his cramped apartment, Marcus saw a headline that made his blood run cold. 18-year-old genius Daniel Rivers becomes youngest CEO of multi-million-dollar tech company, from homeless shelter to corner office. The article featured a photo of a young man with intelligent eyes and a familiar face. Marcus stared at the screen, his hands trembling. He knew that face. He knew those eyes. Marcus read the article 3 times, his heart pounding harder with each pass. Daniel Rivers, 18 years old, raised by a single mother who worked multiple jobs to support his education, a mathematical prodigy who had earned a full scholarship to MIT at 15, graduated at 17, and immediately launched a tech company that revolutionized data encryption. Current net worth estimated at $47 million and climbing. But it was the photograph that haunted Marcus. The young man had his eyes, that same piercing gaze, the same strong jawline, the same expression of fierce intelligence that Marcus saw in his own mirror every morning back when he'd been someone. He clicked through more articles, desperate for information. There were interviews, profiles, features in major publications. Daniel spoke about his mother with reverence, crediting her sacrifice and unconditional love for his success. He spoke about growing up in shelters, about hunger, about watching his mother work herself to exhaustion. He never mentioned a father. Marcus's hands were shaking now. He did the math, 18 years ago. Grace, the maid he threw out with $20,000 and threats. No, he whispered to his empty apartment, it can't be. But deep down he knew. The timeline was perfect. The resemblance was undeniable. That brilliant, successful young man, that rising star the entire business world was watching, was his son. The son he denied. The son he tried to erase. For 3 days, Marcus was paralyzed by the revelation. He barely ate. He couldn't sleep. His mind raced through scenarios, justifications, possibilities. He had a son, a genius son, a wealthy, successful son who could restore everything Marcus had lost. The idea grew in his mind like a poisonous flower. If he could just reach out, if he could just explain, if he could reconnect with his son, his blood, surely Daniel would understand. Surely he would help his own father. Marcus found Daniel's company address online. He bought the most expensive suit he could afford with his maxed-out credit card. He rehearsed his speech 100 times. He was going to meet his son. Marcus stood in the gleaming lobby of Rivers Tech, feeling like an imposter in his own skin. The building was everything his former empire had been. Glass and steel, modern art on the walls, beautiful people moving with purpose. The receptionist, a polished young woman with a professional smile, looked at him with polite confusion. "I'm here to see Daniel Rivers," Marcus said, trying to sound confident. Tell him it's his father." The receptionist's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, sir. Mr. Rivers doesn't take unscheduled meetings. If you'd like to make an appointment,
Just tell him Marcus Whitmore is here. He'll understand. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition? Perhaps disgust? She picked up the phone, spoke quietly, then looked up with barely concealed surprise. "Mr. Rivers will see you. Top floor." Marcus's heart raced as the elevator climbed. The doors opened to an executive suite that spoke of taste, success, and power earned rather than inherited. And there, standing by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, was Daniel. He was taller than Marcus expected, lean and confident in an impeccably tailored suit. He turned slowly, and Marcus saw his own features reflected back at him, but refined, improved, combined with Grace's gentle strength. So, the sperm donor finally shows up. Marcus flinched. "Daniel, I know this is unexpected. You have 60 seconds before I have security remove you." "I'm your father." "You're nothing." Daniel's voice was sharp as broken glass. A father is someone who stays, who protects, who sacrifices. You're just a man who got my mother pregnant and threw her into the street like garbage. "I made mistakes. I was young, scared, foolish. You were 45 years old. You were a billionaire, and you threw a pregnant woman out of your mansion with nothing." Daniel stepped closer, his eyes burning. "Do you know what my mother went through? Do you know how many nights she went hungry so I could eat? How many times she worked until her hands bled?" Marcus felt shame flooding through him, hot and suffocating. "I want to make it right. I've lost everything. I'm sorry." "You're not sorry. You're broke."
The silence in the office was deafening. Marcus stood before his son, stripped of pride, wealth, and dignity. Daniel watched him with eyes that had seen too much suffering, earned too much wisdom to be fooled by desperate words. "You didn't come here to apologize. You came here because you need something. Money, probably. A job. A way back into the world you lost." Marcus couldn't meet his gaze. The truth was written all over his face. Daniel walked to his desk and picked up a folder. "I knew you'd come eventually. Men like you always do, so I had my lawyers prepare something." He handed Marcus the check. Inside was a check for $20,000, the exact amount Marcus had given Grace 18 years ago. "That's what you thought a human life was worth. My mother's dignity was worth, what I was worth. So that's what you get, not a penny more." Marcus stared at the check, his hands trembling. "Daniel, please. My mother lives in a beautiful home now. She never has to work again. She has everything she ever deserved and never got from you." Daniel's voice was steel wrapped in ice. "She wanted me to forgive you. She's a better person than either of us. But I told her forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it definitely doesn't mean rescuing someone from consequences they earned." He pressed a button on his desk. 2 security guards appeared at the door. "You have 2 choices. Take that check and leave, or refuse it and leave with nothing. Either way, you leave, and you never contact me or my mother again. If you do, I have lawyers who will bury you in lawsuits you can't afford to fight." Marcus looked at his son, this brilliant, powerful young man he had thrown away, and saw no mercy, no forgiveness, no second chances. Only justice. He took the check with shaking hands and walked toward the elevator, escorted by security. As the doors closed, he caught one final glimpse of Daniel, standing tall and unshakable, a king in a kingdom he'd built from nothing. The elevator descended, carrying Marcus back down to the life he deserved. Above him, Daniel picked up his phone and called his mother. "Mom, it's done." He came, and he left. We're free now.
Sometimes the people we discard become the ones who rise highest. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or karma. It comes from a mother's sacrifice and a son's determination to honor it. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true life stories.
Share this video with someone who needs to remember that your beginning doesn't determine your ending. Your choices do. Drop a comment below telling us what you would have done if you were Daniel. Would you have forgiven Marcus, or would you have done exactly what Daniel did? And don't forget, comment your country below. We love hearing from our global family. Thank you for watching. Until next time, remember, never underestimate the person you throw away. They might just become the one you desperately need.